All right. So thank you very much to you all, actually, for inviting me to do this talk. It's a pleasure to be here. Very, very excited. So I'm speaking from Bangkok. Let me start sharing the screen before I start talking. I forgot why we are here tonight. So, all right. This is all right. You can see my screen. I assume it's right. Okay. So the topics you already knows, we talk about realities. So, and then I will explain basically based on my actual research for my PhD, what I'm doing on collecting these design pedagogy prototypes. So I'm based in Bangkok at the moment, but I'm teaching for a UK university in Wuhan, China. And at the same time, I'm a resident artist for Thai Italian Chamber of Commerce and about to complete a PhD with Plymouth University, UK again. Okay, let's kick off the topic. So I would say, so reality is something that, of course, is based on what we perceive is a subjective matter, right? So it's based on our culture and our location. So I think it's important for us, for our students, to really be aware, somehow proud on our roots and the context where we are operating, where we're operating now, and probably where we are about to operate. So we really need to understand better who we are. And by working this side of the world, I often find the question about creativity and originality, for instance. So I think maybe it can be interesting to point out that there are quite a different perspective in this topic. So in terms of when we talk about originality, this part of the world, I mean, in the Asian side, from what I understood, originality means that something would be presented in the specific context. And even if we have something similar, the other side of the world, there will be anyway something new, original, perhaps called creativity, creative. While, as you know, in the West, in the East side, in the West side, to have something that we can consider original has to be totally new, nobody saw before. So this slightly difference that seems smaller can be bigger, the perception of how we perceive, how we judge creativity in different sides of the world. The side where I'm working, so the territory where I'm working, some time ago has been called the non-tactile society. So I think it's relevant to mention that as well, because so of course we operate in design, we work and in a specific society, right? When we design for somebody, we need really to know who is in front of us. The term non-tactile society, I assume, came from the fact that, for instance, Southeast Asia and Thailand, that start from the observation of the people from this researcher already years ago, start from the fact that people don't shake their hand, for instance. They are very specific physical space, okay? And that goes in every daily, let's say, operation, okay? It's a daily routine. And our data, our culture, of course, is related to the strata of religious and belief. In Thailand, it is well known for being a Buddhist country. More than 95% of the population consider themselves Buddhist. And there are, of course, strata of animism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Those things, of course, are relevant, you know, because especially for me, that I'm somehow a guest this land, that gives me a better understanding of the people I'm talking to, I am working every day to do. So this, probably you saw this picture before, if you went to this side of the world, you know that this is the way of greetings, of course. in Thailand. So the why. So that is, there are many ways to use this. There are one more sophisticated, the way that is for the monk, and the one for only for a specific group of people or different celebration, for instance. And that gives us sort of tangible sense of physical space. You don't touch each other, so you use this. And this is something that happens every day, even with the new generation. So, but why we talk about this? Because as may you agree that design is a collection of experience. And why design, again, for others, we need really to understand what is around us. We became designer by collecting those experiences. We know that even if our students get a degree, to be really effective, so you really need to accumulate experience, okay? And the good and the bad experience in a professional and academic way. And that's create what will be then the design. So it's a never-ending learning, basically. It's a lifelong learning, our journey. And I point this project because by doing this theatrical project, this was somehow a sort of milestone for my design career, because I start to see the value of the body on the design as well. So I was invited to be part as a production art design for this scientific production, scientific in the way they want to talk about melioidosis in Southeast Asia, and they choose this media to inform the public. This was done with Bflor. This is a company based in Thailand, through the sponsor of by Art in Global Health, by Wellcome Collection, that I assume you all know, the Wellcome Trust from UK. So those are just some pictures of the show. And this started my interest into working with the body, and understand the value of how I can bring then the idea of the body into the classroom. So that's, I start to formulate the idea. So by reading papers as you all. So education, say, always teach us something about everything, but a little about ourselves. That's even the case into design. We always talk about others, persona in terms of marketing sometimes. And, but we really push a bit in general, at least from my experience, our student to discover more about the self. And so I start to asking myself first, where we should position social, virtual, physical body in the design education curriculum. There is a space, there is any gap where we can operate, or we can try to push the direction of self as well, self exploration, okay, to understand reality and realities, to be aware that ours is just one subjective reality. And I start to look into the idea of proprioception and interception. So what is our feeling in this moment? I'm talking in front of the screen. How different would be if I was one-to-one with you all, or I'm now in a room with aircon, it's quite cold. If I'm outside the moment, it would be very warm, quite hot, I would say. So all those feelings are important to be aware any moment. As designer, as any professional, that can change our attitude and how we approach even the others. So I try to explore those areas with my students. That's why I started the idea that to develop the idea that body movement and time can help to translate emotion to visible element. You know, to each student to create a sort of self-reflection. You know, be more aware of the self, but even about the others around them. So somehow the physicality of knowledge create a set of automatisms that can be incorporated into the body. Somehow like the pianist, when you play a piano, became the piano itself. So that's what somehow our design student should be. So design should be something that's part of who we are. So then I started a series of pedagogy prototypes that by looking at old experiment like the Frederick Kiesler with the design correlation, he was the one who, for instance, started even the idea of theater and bringing the element of theater performance to architecture, and the famous situational from the 60s from Central San Martin. And of course, Roy Ascott, that's even my director of study of planetarium collegium with his ground course, where I try to challenge students and challenge student their behavior and their preconception through action, okay? This, for instance, is one of the sample, one of the prototype I did with my students. So now you see just this dark fabric and white robe. So this picture is just one frame of student interaction when student product design I mean sort of furniture design, old school product design, okay? I was asking them to bring an element of theater, of performance in their work. And the first reaction was sort of shock. Didn't know where to start, how and why. I was asking them after 4 years on the product, study mechanism, a technique of how to making things. In this case, I asked them about their feeling, how they can make the feeling working in a designer way. So I asked them to then to make a physical prototype of their feeling, and they start to create a sort of box where they try to express the fact they were lost in space somehow, sort of jump into the dark because they have no idea what theater means, was something too far for them. And based on this, we build up together the brief until we agree on build room. They basically occupy several big classrooms in the building to create a sort of dark room where they're open to everybody, where people can enter, have the same feeling that they had at first time when I was asking them to bring theater into their experience. So sort of people can walk into this room barefoot and most of the time by closing their eyes or in the dark room, and they play with the senses. And then for them was the first time to do this experiment. The idea was to break the barrier between audience and performer. So the idea at this time was not just in the product itself that was sort of interior we can call, but the experience, and they want to make sure that people who enter this space had the same sensation, same feeling they had when I was asking them to bring this new element into the study. Same another experiment with another group. We always in Thailand, between 18 and 21 years old. So in this case, it was a sort of old school machine. So if you notice on the top, there's element, of course, they have to find their own equilibrium. The second one in the gray area as well. So basically, they have this sort of stand where on the bottom, there is a sort of half sphere. So they are first to find their own balance. And secondly, they have to find a way to make sure that the sand at the center don't throw away, don't go to the floor. So it's a way to make everybody aware that to be a team that's working, you need to work together. Ownness and knownness, because they have to live somehow the present and be aware of what they are doing at this moment. Those are a photo of several experiment prototype done on under the same umbrella. This is a different project that, again, is related to the daily body and the reality and the realities. The fact that I did this, we can call fashion collection, but basically this start by collecting fabric from North to South Thailand, from a small community. And actually, when I started, the idea was not just to do a fashion collection. I had no intention of this. The idea was I was fascinated basically by the narrative of those fabric, because each area, each community created its own narrative. For me, as I'm into visual communication, that was the main things. Then after a while, I collect many. I translate in something that can consider an outfit. What happened then? I bring this collection, say, I show to people here, and somehow they were shocked because most of those fabric, especially the one in gold, for them represent sort of childhood, a sort of memory from their grandpa. They never expect to see this in a new light, redesigned somehow with a new cat, a new tailored cat. And was shocking at the same how make them proud of their own roots. At the same time, when I present this to the Western world, was the idea of dream to discover another side of the Thailand, of Southeast Asia. Most of them, they don't know about. So the idea of that each product, as you know, is not just its physicality, but all the concepts that can be related to people one side and another side. So it's a preconception that we have, a collective, and our own preconception. Imaginarium on one side and nostalgia. That was the beauty for me of this project and the feedback I had. That's again, making my idea of bringing the body and to education relevant to design education. This year we start talking on the design education in China. With my student this semester, I start this project. I ask them to select an object from, they have a term since 1 or 2 generations. And some of them, they bring like TV like that one. Some banknote, for my student, banknote from the 80s is already an artifact. Suddenly I feel very, very old when they say so. So others start to pick rulers or any object we can find in any house. But that was just a starting point, because then I asked them to ask when they receive, when those objects enter their home, and what is the feeling of the family member about the single object. So it can be military chest, it can be the ruler, some the teapots. And from that on, they start to analyze what was the society at the time. And from the society, what was, of course, and then I ask more specifically, what was the trend in terms of design, demographic. And for most of them was an alternative way somehow to discover somehow their roots, because they are projected to the future all the time. They think what you can do tomorrow. But most of them, they never think, how was the life 20 years ago or 30 years ago? And they're quite emotional about this. I saw even the video from the parents for some object, quite emotionally attached. This is another prototype that I did before the COVID in China. Was a day workshop. I asked students to go to the bookstore, the library, and pick any line from a random book, and then take a photo according to the feeling they had. They had to catch the emotion through just a single shot. And those are the photos that each student take that day. They read to me the two line they find on any book, and then they compare with the feeling. And then here was an experiment on the body. They walk around a large space, work like in a theatrical, like to be just one body as the society. For instance, in Thailand, many times people say, we are one society, we are one body, where the head, of course, are the royal. The rest, we are the body of this society. And that's very important. And by talking about design and the education, talking about others, a little about the self. In August, I had the opportunity to talk about those prototypes in the Contemplative Pedagogy Symposium. It was interesting to see how people from different fields feel that, and I agree with that. So we teach students a lot of, we fill students with a lot of information, but we never have the time to breathe, think about it, to do self-reflection. And then we did an experiment by using meditation, and I asked them to use their own body to draw through their feet, or by being just by stand up or closing their eyes. So we did several experiments that days. That's in each them and find them something unexpected. And to the idea of, again, reality, perception, what we perceive. So I was asked from a meditation center, for instance, to do one workshop where, in this case, more art than design, if you agree. We did a meditation, and then similar to the workshop we see before, but in this case, in a meditation center, was I give them a large piece of paper, and after meditating, people start to draw, start like doodling. I think those people are not into art, not into design. So most of them, they say that was quite revealing, because somehow they are capable to bring back somehow their own child, the inner child. And some of them are quite emotional after this short session. I will call the part of Dharma art. So I keep asking those questions through those experiments, those prototypes, let's say. There is any space where we should position social, and now we are always to the virtual world, physical body, the design education curriculum. There is a space for that. What do you think, May? Those are the questions I would like to ask you. Of course, are big questions, but I would like to have an idea from you. How relevant is to introduce the idea, the body, not just in terms of physical body, but to be aware of the self. So just experiment. How can design teach kids complex topic as mental wellness or accepting their roots? I'm talking even about this because in the last few years I've done several workshops and teaching even students in the range K-12, and bringing to them the idea of design approach. This is, for instance, a book that I did with my daughter when I was 1 year old, and then this became a serious video and workshop in person and online. And then international school asked me to develop class for them. And then should we push design not only in the design, not only in the design, and not only in higher education, but should we integrate somehow the design and teaching and the practice-based research approach into every school level, of course, with a slightly different approach? Those are somehow my question for you that I would like to have a conversation. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Tommaso, for a very interesting talk. And yeah, do you want to, I'll tell you what, you want to flick it back to the first question? Maybe we could start with that, if that'll be okay. Or if anybody had any other general questions of Tommaso's work, the context within which he's working, or any observations or points about the presentation, then please feel free, type a question in the chat, or shout out. We're relatively informal here. Please feel free to jump in and ask questions. For me, the embodiment question is really quite an important and foundational one, like how we understand, well, how it is that our bodies understanding, if you want to think of it that way. Does anybody want to jump in and ask any questions? Well, maybe before we turn to the embodiment question, then there was a couple of interesting, I'm going to call them contradictions, Tommaso, and you can contradict me if I'm wrong in the presentation. But for example, there was one activity that you said was deliberately to try to almost isolate participants from cultural experience. So I think your phrase was to remove them from a religious or a cultural experience and to almost put them into blank space. But yet so many of the other activities recognized and welcome and celebrated, where it is that we come from. I mean, did you find any success in that divorce of individual from cultural context or social context? Or were you deliberately playing with this as a thing that can't be done, if you want to think of it that way? I don't know. What was the ideas behind those kind of sort of apparent contradictions?
Yes, no, of course, you can't take away any preconception. It's very hard. I mean, the idea is not to take away, but just to show that there are, as you say, there are other realities. So my goal is just to make students aware that what they are living at the moment is just one specific reality. And when we do this specific prototype, you just be aware that this is your own point of view. And then I ask, for instance, each experiment, I collect and ask students to collect feedback from each participant, just to see how different each participant understand their work. So I don't know if I answer your question.
Okay, yeah, I bet it'll maybe actually tease out as we have the discussion. So no, I'll leave it to that. I want to go to
okay.
Krona, or is it Charlotte? My apologies, Charlotte, if it's not Krona. I'm sorry. Do you want to ask a question, or yeah?
Yeah, sorry for not using my camera. It's kind of broken.
Okay,
no problem.
Still hunting down IT. But I was thinking about this embodiment and this understanding your own cultural luggage, and I think they're very interconnected. And I was thinking, like, in Malmö University, where I teach product design students in bachelor degree, we usually start talking about it in relation to ergonomics and user-centered design, how we have our own filters and how we have to be aware about them. And that kind of touches upon it, but in somehow it's not enough. And I know we also talk about it in the material-driven design course we have in the second year, where it's about how do we interpret different materials, because that is so cultural related, and that's the term where we also have exchange students, which give a more interesting discussion around these topics. Because I've been working in Asia, China, Korea, and Japan, and there I was the oddball, the one who interpreted it totally different from everybody else. So it's kind of very interesting to see that clash and how much that affects. But would you say, when do you think that students are mature enough to have this discussion? Because I mean, first semester they kind of just land in the chaos that they're in a higher education. Is that the time where you kind of fill that dimension into the chaos, or is it more when they get a bit more reflecting on the second term?
Well, thank you for the question. So there are a lot of conversation to do here. So one thing I can before answer to this. So I used the first time this approach, and let's say bringing theater into the class. For instance, one of the first prototype I did was with first year students. That is another experiment I didn't show today, but because when students arrive, as maybe some of you noticed, they arrive with a very different background, right? So some knows a bit about art and design, some have no idea at all. Some know about mathematics, physics, some have no idea. So even the simple concept as dot line and plane that we all use in design, for some students are very hard to catch. That's why after tried, I don't know how many experiments, I think all of you did, I tried with the body, the idea of the body. I ask students and say, now you are a dot. So if you are a dot, how many dots I need from here to the other side of the door to create a line? So think about the geometry, but the body of the own shape. So now I'm a dot and I act like a dot. So that was, and this experiment, for instance, was quite successful because this case students keep in mind that idea, and I can see students in the second, third year keep this idea. While when I bring the concept that I showed you before in the student fourth year already, of course the idea was quite of shocking them, sort of cultural shock. Again, you are into product design, doing physical stuff, tangible, heavy stuff, and suddenly I asked you to play with intangible. They are shocked first, but then the second semester, likely, of course not all, but they understood the value of it. And I think that I remember that some of them, they can relate even with the idea of the Buddhism, some main concept of religion. That helps somehow to talk in terms of philosophical concept behind this. Of course, you can't expect the full class to stand on the same page, but when at least a part of it, we're capable to engage a conversation and train the others. And if I can go ahead, she was asking Charlotte about materials, if I remember.
Yes.
Yes. So I did one of those prototypes by asking students to sort of self-reflect the self, but as a couple, imagine themselves as material. So I make them as a group, a duo, and then they have to identify and create a prototype based on the idea of about the others. In terms of, if I am talking about Derek, so how you see me, which material you consider can be reflected on me. Maybe in a very simplistic way, some student can say, oh, you are reflective, you are like metal, shining metal. And other will say, oh, for me, this person is like rubber. So, and based on this simple concept, they start to build up a prototype, a tangible prototype. The most interesting part was the conversation, the philosophical conversation that bring up this.
Mm-hmm.
This is just my experience. I don't know if I answered.
No, yeah, you did, because it's about as I interpret you, bring them into the chaos from the beginning,
Yes.
and learn them to navigate it, and also this be able to embrace ambiguity and from the beginning. I think we played a bit safe in the beginning, just to keep them, because we have a lot of students who are not used to study in higher studies. So we want them to be in the comfort zone first before we challenge them on these issues, and also being more philosophical about it. But we also have older students. So the youngest ones are 20 and the oldest one are like 40 something. So we have a different context in that way.
So I wonder if that then links to John's comment in the text just now, talking about how in a few spaces, not everywhere, but we're moving back, if you like, to physical proximity and temporal proximity. We're moving back into, if you like, physical teaching spaces, and that's bringing back with it maybe a few changes or subtle differences. John, I don't know if you've noticed any differences, or I mean, certainly obviously the obvious ones, you know, the reconnection, the social anxiety, but I wonder if there's any foundational differences or more fundamental differences that maybe have switched off. Or
yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, by all means, not all the students, but a number of our, maybe not the first years, actually more the second years, weirdly, kind of coming back into spaces with each other, and they've got so used to each other at a distance, they're kind of unsure about each other when they physically meet them now, which is, like I say, it's a dynamic shift in that start of term relationship building activity. So I think just on a basic level, it's an interesting observation, an interesting set of exercises.
Here's what I wonder then, because it picks up on another phrase that you used, Tommaso, that you know, you're talking about where you are as a non-tactile society, which seemed a really weird phrase, a really odd phrase, because everybody is tactile, everybody does have a body. And yes, you know, you can have neurodiverse conditions and a whole bunch of other issues that can reduce that tactility, but we still have some sense. There's very few individuals who have very little sense of types of sense or of cognition in their body. I'm wondering whether there's a more subtle discussion round about tactility, proximity and materiality that needs to happen, because it's not that people aren't tactile, I'm guessing, in your context, Tommaso. It's not that. It's that there's a different way of embodiment of going about tactility. And that's the more subtle, that's the more interesting thing, to be quite honest. I don't know if that's a relevant point.
No, I agree with you. So I point out this non-tactile because it's quite, as you say, it's quite a statement.
It's an assumption.
To say that. So
sorry, right. I see. Right, my apologies.
It is.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
It is. And in fact, if you notice, was quite old from the 90s, that one. You know, but I point out because still affects somehow the preconception about the culture here. And anyway, what's interesting is somehow it's related to the fact that the body, how religious and the daily activity are related to the body. Of course, we talk all in terms of philosophical part, and we talk about Buddhist, in terms of Buddhism and in terms of the body. Of course, we can say you don't touch the body. Okay, but this is just in the philosophical style. So it's very different. The fact that I can say, somebody can say, okay, the man can never touch a woman, always have to keep the distance, there are areas not enter, but this is different from the daily routine. Okay, this is a very specific case.
Yep. Okay. Well, yeah. I'm also going to pick up on Krohn's comment on the question there, that this change, again, it's simple to say you're either at a distance or you're face-to-face, but even students pushing back on that phrase face-to-face over the last year and how they've actually connected, I think it is more of a spectrum, perhaps. I don't know whether there are any other differences that anybody have noticed, you know, students when they're coming back in to spatial settings, or as we've transitioned from digital spaces, or if anybody had noticed any differences in virtual spaces and how students have interacted over that period and how that relates to embodiment. I know certainly as a really crude example from us at the Open University, we still use a lot of metaphor. So we will describe our studio in spatial terms. We won't describe it in functional terms, or we try to. And again, I know that quite a few people do that as well. Lawrence, yep, go for it.
Hi, it's not Lawrence, it's me.
Oh, no, it is.
My son has hijacked my iPad and I've got his identity. Yeah, fantastic. I mean, this is really interesting. So we usually run a physical theatre workshop around week 3 out of the 10 weeks of our modules. We haven't done it in the module that we've just run. We did do one online, which was kind of okay. But the physical theatre workshop, I mean, what you've been saying is just really put that into context. For us, it works really well. It has an incredible transformative effect on the students. It gets them working closer together, both mentally and physically, and gets them a different attitude towards risk-taking. And, you know, it does all kinds of stuff for us. We actually use a professional physical theatre company who are experts at doing this called Highly Sprung to do it. And it's amazing. But I think actually, 2 things. When we run this in January, it's going to be interesting to see the students who've been mostly doing stuff online coming into a theatre studio and getting together and doing this physicality. That's going to be different. It's going to be really interesting to observe. The other change that I want to make is I've got a big new building to use, lots of exciting spaces. So I want to get them, do that in the physical theatre workshop, but then get them to take that out and to expand out step by step to a more public and more a greater kind of spatiality. So, and I think you've inspired me to do that, I think.
Cool. So there's another one then that just builds on exactly that, Robert. And by the way, it'd be really good if you do get the chance to observe that. It'd be really fantastic if you'd, should put a shout out and see if anybody wants to do a bit of autoethnographic stuff. But I know certainly any time I've been engaged in any dramaturgical stuff, it has been really quite powerful. But the thing I've noticed is, and this touches on another issue, Tommaso, that I wanted to raise, is that notion of subjective reality, and that everybody has an isolated subjective reality. And I do have a slight issue with that. Well, not so much an issue, but I would challenge it in terms of how that relates to collectives. And that, again, it's not necessarily, it gets co-opted quite a lot, this idea of isolated subjectivities, and particularly gets really strongly co-opted into the neoliberal agenda. But take the drama example. Even though you might be having an isolated experience, it only works as an isolated experience because there are others there, if you like, within the frame of reference. And you're also pulling in all the cultural stuff, the contextual stuff and all that. So I just wondered whether you've thought about, whether you reflected on that spectrum of completely isolated and subjective stuff all the way through to, you've mentioned the word collective culture, you talked about nostalgia, even you used the word nostalgia. So on that spectrum between collective stuff and individual stuff, I don't know, have you any thoughts on that, or what your education space is doing?
Well, the idea is similar to the meditation somehow. So when you meditate, so in my practice of meditation, for instance, I keep the eye open, because the idea is even if you are somehow isolated, okay, you want to keep an eye open because you need to be always aware where you are. So even when I do some experiment that feel quite isolated, so you really need to be, anyway, you are aware where you are. And then, as you said before, you use all your senses. Maybe you close your eyes, but you have the other senses that help you to always see the position somehow geographically, but not only, any part of your body, any feeling can help you to really be where you are. And this is important, because if not, you have the risk that everything works once and only if you are isolated. Like I talk with people, they say, oh, I cannot do meditation because I can never be, I'm not able to stay in the same place and sit down for more than 30 seconds. But the point is not that. The point is just to be aware where you are at the moment. And all those experiences help you somehow train you to be self-confident when you are alone, and then you have to be, if works even when you are with others. So it's, of course, it's a matter of practice. It's not that direct.
Okay, so I mean, how does that, or how might that help students to understand where there might be, say, a collective culture, or even a non-identified, if you like, culturally? Well, no, let's keep it simple, like an overtly declared identity, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. It can help students because somehow in the moment when I ask them to do so they know that this is a sort of, that's why I call prototype, because somehow is a space that can take for themselves. You know, it's a specific moment.
Mm-hmm.
The same, we are in the creational environmental, let's say, in the context, this is quite a safe context where you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And because you are safe in this context, then you may feel more comfortable to do. Mm-hmm. This sort of training, you do your training in the gym, and then you go in the ring to do things.
Okay. Okay.
So that's a sort of paradigm, yeah.
Okay. So I mean, have you extended then your sort of experiment to encourage students to take that approach, if you like, in a context independently of the training space, if you see what I mean?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
I push them to do that.
Right.
And yes, in different situations. So even I know that some of them did because they went to do internship from office where I know people working there. So, and see how the attitude somehow after those experiments somehow change. Even actually, some of my colleagues say to me at the time that students after these classes where I did those experiments, those student attitude slightly change. Mm-hmm. Of course, I cannot say that it's just because my class, but probably this class make a sort of was another little step, let's say, to make them in this direction.
Oh, okay.
And I noticed, but when other colleagues say so, maybe it was true.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then, yeah, student after a while called me back to thanks me for those experiments they never did before. Even some say, oh, I complain at the beginning, but later on I understood the value of it. Mm-hmm. Of course, not under the student, but mm-hmm. I mean, for me it's important, even if just a couple of students out of 20 understood the concept, it's already mm-hmm. a good thing.
Yep, and Crona's asking there, well, Crona, did you want to jump in? Or sorry, Charlotte. Is it Charlotte, Crona?
No, it is Crona. My colleague has just left, so I can turn on again.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm just curious how that manifests itself. You know, these changes. What has your colleague identified as the change?
They mentioned it was in terms of attitude, in terms of preconception, in the way they face a new challenge. Because, you know, sometimes we are used to say students complain about new things. But in fact, sometimes it's not just a complaint, it's just a matter that they're really somehow shocked about what we ask because they don't have any maybe to understand what we consider the new normality. But after this class, several of my colleagues say students change attitude in the way that maybe some of those students are actually one or before complain about it and didn't happen again. Another thing that happened when I did those experiments, this prototype, that some of the students, the one that usually are at the top of the class, they drop to be the last in the class. So I mean, probably because they are at the top because they are used to the same things over and over. But if you change the perspective of what you have to do, of course they are a bit lost. But at the same time, the one who are used to work in the same way for 3-4 years, they lost control. But the others that most of the time they are behind the schedule, not very sure about themselves. Actually, I'm glad that I helped them, and by giving them somehow the power, I don't know how to call, but giving them the credit somehow, and that changed at least the, let's say, the atmosphere in each class. That I think that's important.
Nicole's mentioning in the text just that notion of, well, Nick, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, sorry. I've been doing loads of other things meanwhile, just listening in. No, it's so interesting, you know, it's, sorry, I didn't mean different to measure, so change is difficult to measure because it manifests differently in everyone, isn't it? So that's the tricky thing.
Right.
So if you ask often, so tell me, what does change look like? And you're like, so, you know, I can't really say it for everyone as such, but you're right. You can feel it, and we lack the words, do we, to describe what that is? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, Tommaso, I mean, do you, I know this is going to sound really boring. I don't mean it as a boring question. Do you assess this, or do you rely on students' assessment of it? And if so, do you assess the students' assessment? If you see what I mean, it's like, how do you validate? How do you say that's a useful thing to recognize? This is a less useful thing to recognize, I suppose.
Yes. So of course, for my study, so I create a sort of, let's say, a fundamental element. You know, I say, okay, I need to see how. For me, it's a self-reflection somehow, even for my practice. So I combine what is my own practice somehow as designer and researcher, and then I need to review those works. That's why one thing is my feedback just after finish the prototype, and then after a few months or a year after finish. So I compare the two things. At the same time, I've collected the experience of students. This is what I did. So my reflection student and colleague who somehow assist to the class, maybe not directly, but they saw students before and after. That's helped me to understand. Of course, I've created some tools for me to validate if some, of course, prototypes were good somehow. Let's simplify, good or not. Okay, I know not. Of course, I can't say that all the experiments are 100% because then I will be a magician, not a design researcher, right? Indeed. So, but as I say, even if just I notice somehow the proof, because students say, colleagues say that 5% of students understood that their own practice can be expanded. That was a C. And if the attitude changes through this experiment, somehow means the experiment succeed. Of course, if 0 out of 100, something was not right. But you know, only by experimenting those things, you have the results. Mm-hmm. Then depend. And again, you have always to consider that I am what they call here an expert. Here, work in a different context, probably the feeling is different. Even when I bring in people from theater, first time, even other colleagues, let me notice that because I call a female director, students react in a very specific way. When I call a male director to do this physical activity, the reaction was quite different.
Yes, absolutely.
So
yeah, I mean,
that's
just quickly on that,
yeah.
I mean, have you tried any other forms of theatre? What form of theatre are you using, by the way?
This is a device theatre. Mm-hmm. Device theatre is quite physical theatre. Yep. Okay, it's like between improvisation and yeah, sort of based on, they have a script, but then they can improvise based even on feedback.
Okay. Have you tried any other forms of theatre, or even, you know, even in the context within which you are? Have you tried traditional forms of theatre or other?
Well, I tried those because I start to work with the theatre I showed you before, and then I engage with people working the same with this practice, and then I think was the most suitable for this group of students, because it was the more somehow energetic, we can call it this way, and the fact that this give a big and quick change. It's like a reversal for theater. Sometimes we try even those.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
And
brilliant. Okay. Well, I'm very conscious of the fact that we're just at the end of the hour. My apologies. We try to keep the time so that I know that colleagues have to run off to the next Zoom meeting or whatever. So Tommaso, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for that. It was a really interesting talk. I hope everybody enjoyed it. As I mentioned before, the next talk will be Adolfo Ruiz, who I think it's the 17th of December. Let me just check quickly. 17th of December, Adolfo Ruiz. That's going to be entitled Lessons from the Land. That could be an interesting one about indigenous practice. Knowing Adolfo's work, I think that will be quite like Tommaso's here, it'll be something different. And again, it's useful and really interesting to see these different practices and to really ask what could be, what's useful about them, what's good about them. So Tommaso, thank you very much once again. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thank you.
And I hope to see some of you the next time. So thank you very much.